Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
Do you like organic fair trade coffee? Do you appreciate a well-made pour-over, but just don't have time for all the rigmarole of setup, cleanup, and brew time? Reach for Mount Hagen Coffee. When you want that artisanal flavor, but don't have time for all the bullshit. Mount Hagen Coffee, brought to you by Airey Bros Radio.
Whether on top of a 14er or the Airey Bros need a pick-me-up after the daily challenge, Airey Bros reach for Honey Bunches. Honey Bunches, the peanut pecan honey bar with over 42% of pure honey in each and every bar. Honey Bunches is gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free. Honey Bunches is family-owned and operated here in the great state of Colorado since 2013. Go to honeybunches.com and use the promo code ABR 1512 for a 10% discount on the boys of 1512. Once again, that is promo code ABR 1512 at honeybunches.com.
Life is for creation. We're here to bring something into existence that didn't exist before. That's what I feel. I am the Love Jock. For the next hour, it's all Mandy all the time with the Love Jock. It's called Echo Park Shitface. That was ironic because I had to audition to read my own book on tape. If Bob Marley is Jesus in these times, Roger Steffens is Peter. Carlos Santana. Have you seen my book, my Marley book? This one? So much things to say. Into red. Everything I've come across about reggae, Rasta, Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, all the things that a study of reggae leads you to. I've supported my reggae habit as an actor, mostly voiceovers, but we still have those songs of freedom to give us solace, to give us guidance, to give us hope. So here is our acid family. In fact, I met my wife on an acid trip in a pygmy forest in Mendocino under a total eclipse of the moon. Yep, that'll do it. This is Roger Steffens, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
What's up, y'all? This is Airey Bros Radio, and this is episode 64 with Roger Steffens. You ready, man?
Oh, you already know, man. I'm lit and ready to go. I got some Echo Park shit face in my pipe, ready to release this one to the Airey Bros masses. This is a treat for y'all this week.
Yo, get yourself some Bob Marley, Exodus, Catch a Fire, whatever album is your favorite album. I want you to turn that on and get pumped up and get ready, because we're bringing you Roger Steffens, Bob Marley, historian, author, photographer, and he's also a Jersey guy.
Yeah, Richie, when we were watching Who Shot the Sheriff last week, and we were watching, he said, "Oh man, there's a Bob Marley historian," and I went and dived and found Roger, and he's got a bunch of Bob Marley books out. He's got The Family Acid, which is him and his family putting out some of his photography throughout the years. He's got a huge list of acting credentials. Roger is the most epic, and this is the most epic podcast you're about to listen to.
We'll put all Roger's info, where you can find his books, where you can find his family, acid, all that stuff in the show notes. But it's podcasts like this that remind me to be grateful in times like this, because if there's one thing that's come from our current climate in the world is that it has allowed us to connect with some really amazing people and have some really amazing conversations. And this documentary just came up because we put it on the watch list for Jules 2.0. And within probably a 24-hour period, we had a connection with Roger and a scheduled date to get him on and talk about Bob Marley, reggae. We even talked about Timothy Leary. We go all over the place on this. This was such a great episode. Roger was so gracious with his time. And we even broke a record, because that's what we do at Airey Bros. We break records. And this conversation was the longest interview that Roger has ever done. So we are proud to bring this to you. And like I said, the world would be a much better place right now if we were just pumping One Love 24/7 and maybe some other choice Marley tunes and get us out of this situation that we're living in right now. We all just need a little love, a little higher vibration, some good positive energy. Roger brings the heat. We're so grateful for him to come on. You got anything else, Prince?
Spark one up, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Airey Bros Radio.
Yo, we're going into the red. Much love. Namaste from the boys of 1512. The reason why we contacted you, we have another podcast with some of our family members. It's kind of got spurred because of this COVID situation, but it's kind of like a going to a bar meets a book club, where we have a few beverages and then also discuss weekly watch lists like documentaries or different things. And we recommended Who Shot the Sheriff. And so that's where, and I'd seen it a couple times. But when you're just watching things to consume things, you maybe miss a few things. But now that we're doing this with intention of discussing it, we start taking notes and stuff. And one of the most, I've been listening to Bob Marley since I was probably 12 or 13, so close over 30 years. And his music has always been impactful. But last week when we were watching the documentary, I think the most impactful thing or eye-opening thing, the thing that made my hair stand up was the lyric, "Rasta don't work for no CIA."
And that got him in a lot of trouble and forced him to withdraw all his music from sale in Jamaica at the time. He put out the single Rat Race that had that line in it. And incidentally, there's a very rare label-less test pressing of an alternate version of that, where instead of the released version, which says, "Don't involve Rasta in your say-say, Rasta no work for no CIA," say-say meaning gospel, a gossip in Patois. The original lyric was even stronger. "Don't involve Rasta in your misery, Rasta no work for no CIA." And the government of Manly came down pretty harshly on that and banned it from airplay. So he said, "Well, if you're not going to play my records, I'm not going to sell them either." And when I went to Jamaica the following year for the first time, during the week they declared a national state of emergency and mobilized the army and put tanks on all the crossroads. I thought I was back in Saigon during the Tet Offensive, and all I wanted to do was go down there and buy Bob Marley records. We got to Kingston, and it was absolutely deserted. The streets were empty, and Bob's Record Shack happened to be open, and they had no Bob Marley records for sale in his own record store.
Wow. So, how did he come to know that they were, had a file on him? How did he know that the CIA was?
Oh, well, any American who ended up in Jamaica in the 1960s and 70s was automatically a CIA agent.
Okay.
I've been accused of it many times. And they just were so suspicious because the Cubans were in there under Manley, and they were building things and schools and fixing up the airport and just basically trying to get a real toehold in Jamaica. And that scared the hell out of Kissinger and Nixon. And the CIA, basically funded the Jamaican Labor Party of Edward Seaga. In fact, they called him Edward Seaga. And So it was a very fraught time. It was clear that there were proxy wars being fought on the island of Jamaica with influence from Russia and from the United States, and Bob was hip to that. But it made him a target. You know, there was an assassination attempt the following year. He just barely missed being murdered. Bullet came right across his chest.
Yeah. Do you have, other than what we saw in the documentary, do you have any insight or opinions as to who was the actual group or organization or individual that was behind that? I have my thoughts.
There's no doubt that it was a gang of members of the Jamaican Labor Party's enforcers, the head of which was Jim Brown. And he was there. He was spotted by the people that came face to face with him. And the rest of the shooters were basically young kids, which makes me think it was not a direct CIA plot, because they never would have left without being sure they had murdered Bob. It was just a wild shot. The guy wasn't even necessarily looking at Bob when he shot. You know, in Jamaica, it's considered really cool if you can just shoot somebody without even looking at them. You know, so it was a bunch of teenage gunmen with bravado, and they didn't manage to kill a single person.
And talking about attempts on Bob's life, do you have any thoughts or opinions on the CIA agent Bill Oxley that came out and said that he might have injected Bob with cancer due to the shoes and a pin in a shoe? Have you heard that?
Total nonsense. That's fake news. Nobody who was with Bob up at the house in hiding said anything like that ever happened. There's absolutely no proof of that. And Bob's best friend was the soccer player, Skill Cole, and he knew everything about Bob. Bob trusted him totally. He was Bob's closest confidant, and he has insisted to me privately that the boot incident never happened. It's totally false. That's good enough for me.
And talk about Bob's death. I heard you say in, I guess it was a documentary, that he had prophesized his own death like 10 years prior to that.
Even less time. In 1969, Bob spent the summer, that Woodstock summer, in Delaware with his mother. She had married a man named Booker in 1962, I think. And Bob had spent several visits with her in Delaware. And he became very friendly with two young fellows, Ibis Pitts and Dion Wilson. And Ibis had a kind of arts and crafts store across the street from Bob's mother's house. And Bob and Ibis and Dion became very good friends with Bob. And one day, Ibis told me the story. They were sitting around talking with Bob, saying, "Oh, Bob, you know, you're going to be a big star. You're going to be famous. You're going to have a nice long life. You're going to, you know, reach the world with your art." And Bob turned to them at the age of 24, 1969, and said, "No, when I'm 36, I'm going to die." And they were so moved by this that Dion and Ibis went to Bob's mother that day and told her what Bob had told them. And many years later, in an interview I did with Mrs. Booker, Bob's mother, for my cable TV show, LA Reggae, she confirmed that they had come to her at that time and told her that's what Bob said. And I later talked to Ibis and to Dion, and they also confirmed it. So in my latest book, plug, so much things to say, the oral history of Bob Marley, we include that fact that Bob prophesied his own death 12 years in advance. Bob was a prophet. Bob could right in the beginning of the book, I tell a story about Jeffrey Philp, a Jamaican writer who met Bob at the university campus in uptown Kingston I think in 1975, and began talking to him. And within 5 minutes, Bob was telling this guy his whole life story, revealing things that Jeffrey said his mother didn't even know about him. He was just completely blown away. And I've encountered other stories over the years in my research of people saying, you know, Bob knew things about me that he couldn't possibly have known. And those stories go back to the time when he was about 3.5 years of age up in that mountain village of 9 Mile, when he read a woman's hand, and he read the palm of a local constable who went to Bob's mother and said, "You better keep an eye on this kid. There's something really strange going on with him. He couldn't know these things. How could he possibly know these things? He's a little kid." So Bob was a prophet.
Did you have any of those experiences in the 2 weeks you had spent with him?
I sure wish I had. That would have been pretty trippy. And you know, I didn't realize that you did all this psychedelic work too. I thought this was basically about Jamaica, but I was very good friends with Dr. Oscar Janiger and Timothy Leary. So later on, if we talk about those, I'd be glad to fill you in with some of my stories.
So on the question of psychedelics, this is one that I have about Bob. I had read at one time that Bob had spent some time in Gabon, Africa. Is that correct?
He was in Gabon in January of 1980, shortly after I was touring with him. Yeah, and there's a lot of brand new information and so much things to say about that time, which has rarely ever been written about. And I spoke with several people who accompanied Bob on that trip, and there's some amazing stories in there, you know, about people trying to turn over the bus he was traveling in, and how he was expelled from the country for smoking dope, quote unquote. And what happened in the aftermath of that. There was almost a riot because people had filled a stadium to see him, and he was being expelled from the country, and they had to bring him back from the airport and do another show.
So the question I have about that trip, does anyone know, or has anyone heard, did Bob do any iboga when he was in Gabon? Because I know that's where.
Yeah, I doubt that very much.
Okay. The only reason I asked is because I had a pretty profound experience with iboga, and right when I got done with it, the next morning I woke up and I was singing Redemption Song for like 3 days. So that's why I asked, because like none but yourself can free your mind.
You got a warped groove, baby. Is that the same as Ibogaine?
Yeah, it's a so ibogaine is a derivative from iboga. Iboga is the pure root, and ibogaine is an extract from the iboga.
Okay, because I always think of it as a Central American thing, but it's actually in Africa, I guess, huh?
Yeah, from Gabon and the Boiti tribe. But I had always had that question, so thank you.
How different is that from an acid trip or mushrooms?
It's way more intense, and it's about 48 hours. And so, like, I would compare like acid or mushrooms, like the cool, fun cousin, and iboga is like the harsh grandfather.
You know, as you're telling me this, your hands are disappearing. They're just suddenly coming back and disappearing. It's something's at work there. Maybe you're still tripping.
Always.
Did you take it too?
No, I have not done iboga or ibogaine. I have done ayahuasca and have sat 10 or 11 times now in ceremony, both in South America and here in the States. It's not necessarily my favorite. And I think that, with iboga or ibogaine or ayahuasca, the comparison to say like LSD or psilocybin or magic mushrooms, it's always in the dose. And I think when you take ibogaine or iboga or ayahuasca, you're taking a much larger dose, like as Terence McKenna would, classify as a heroic dose. And most instances, for me at least, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but when I do psilocybin or LSD, I'm not taking those large doses. So I would say potentially, psilocybin or LSD could have the same sort of effect as, say, ayahuasca or ibogaine, but I think most people don't dabble in those types of doses.
So why did you feel the need to do it 11 times?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first 7 I did in Peru, and then the next 2 I did with Jimmy, and those 2 sessions I did more because he wanted to do it, and so I figured if he wanted to do it and was down, I had the experience, I would go do it with him. And then the last one, I think I continue to go back maybe a little hesitantly sometimes, is just because I'm still looking for purpose, still looking for answers. And the last 3 times I've done it with either with my brother or with friends. So the first 7, it was all by myself down in the jungle in Peru, didn't know anyone that was there. And based on those experiences, I felt that in a circle with the shaman, I would probably feel more comfortable with the group being people that I'm familiar with or know, or just at least knowing people that have a decent amount of psychedelic experience. Because I think
what was the most profound revelation that you had from all those trips?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me was, I think I came to understand and maybe have a little bit of forgiveness for our upbringing, and not to say that it was the worst experience ever. We were very well off in terms of being provided for, but there was some trauma that was taken on as well. And I think for me, the biggest revelation was just coming to the understanding of how would you have handled raising a kid when you were 25 or 23, and would you have been able to do a much better job at that age? And it was like, no, you were a crazy maniac. And you probably would have handled a lot of the same situations the same way. And so it was kind of like a letting go of some of those, some of the resentment that I had for certain situations, how they were handled. And I came to the realization that at that young of an age, trying to raise an adult when you can still barely take care of yourself, can cause different things like that. So I think that was the biggest revelation.
It's interesting. Do you know about my Instagram, The Family Acid?
Heard about it. So that's how we found you, was the website, but I wasn't on the Instagram.
Katie, our daughter, started the site because in 2013, our son, Devin Marley, spent a year digitizing 40,000 slides I had sitting in a closet back there, beginning in Saigon in '67, just before the Tet Offensive, and working through my life, counterculture photography, basically. And when he finished digitizing them, Katie said, "Why don't I start an Instagram?" And I said, "What's that?" I'm totally technically ignorant to this day. And she started it, and she called it The Family Acid because she said when she was growing up, her friends told her our family was like the Waltons on acid. So they had a little different upbringing, I think, than you did.
Yeah.
Well, were you raised religiously?
Catholic.
We were raised Catholic and have received a good majority of our sacraments, but I think, on Sundays we were dragged kicking and screaming. It wasn't necessarily a choice. It was just what went down. And then when we were allowed to be free thinkers or make our own decisions, I think we both kind of pulled away from it around the same age. Maybe Jimmy stayed in it a little longer for different reasons. But and then with piggybacking off of that, there was because of that, there was a lot of pushback against maybe religion. And then I realized, probably leading into around those first ayahuasca sessions, that there's a big difference between religion and spirituality.
I too am a recovering Catholic.
So
a victim of 15 years of Catholic education.
God bless you.
There's a lot of psychic scars there. I'm still a little hung up in strange Catholic suspenders. But did you go to Catholic schools?
No, we did not have to do that. We are victims of public schools.
Well, thank God for that, I think.
Yeah.
But the Catholics, they teach you how to speak, they teach you how to write, and those two things have served me for the rest of my life. So I'm not totally bitter about it, but what a messed up organization that church proved to be. Anyway, let's not get into that.
Yeah, that's a topic for another day.
No, but the difference between religion and spirituality is enormous.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So are psychedelics, are they a successful tour thing for both of you in your life as you look back? Are you glad you had those experiences, or do you have any reticence about it?
No, I feel like the way we were raised, and I don't want to speak for Rich. I'll let him speak for himself. But I feel we were very sheltered, and a lot of stuff kind of kept away from us, and a lot of maybe intuitive things that we were kind of taught to turn off or not listening to. And being introduced for psychedelics, for at least me, kind of opened that stuff up for me, and kind of made me realize how not significant a lot of things that I make out, they're not that big of a deal. It kind of helped me cope with some things, and just, that hug, when you have a good dose of mushrooms or LSD, you get that good hug or that good wave and kind of washes everything away. For me, that's everything. That's like the reset. That's always kind of get back to zero and ground myself. How about yourself? How was your experience with psychedelics? You find it beneficial?
Oh yeah, I've done over 100 trips. I've never had a bad trip, never. But I've always been careful, as Tim said, about the set and setting. Um, I did acid almost 2 years before I smoked my first joint. And I figured, if you've had an H-bomb, what do you need a firecracker for? But then I went to Nam, I got drafted, and I needed something to cut the tension there. And acid, no. Although in my later months at the end of '69, I did a couple of acid trips there and on the island of the Coconut Monk, which is another story. But for me, acid was so beyond anything I could possibly imagine. It was at the height of the first wave of psychedelic popular usage. And I was living in Milwaukee. I'd been working for a year at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater as an actor. And while I was there, I met an insincere Zen master exterminator poet named Bob Watt, who exterminated cockroaches by telling them to leave. And they went. And he knew a couple of guys who had a direct link to Sandoz. And these guys had a bag, it looked like a 5-pound bag of confectioner's sugar, and it was pure Sandoz. And for a week, they didn't sleep. They sat putting gel caps together of this raw acid, and they were getting stoned through their fingers. And they were awake for like 8 days and nights, and they were just giggling and having so much fun. And all these stories I heard about the danger of drugs, it didn't seem like danger to me. And so finally I dropped with Bob Watt, and we stayed up all night, and the colors were incredible. We went to an all-night deli in downtown Milwaukee, and Bob put his fingernail through the skin of an orange, and it came into me like 100 Indians shooting orange arrows up my nose. And at sunrise, we went to Lake Michigan, and the two of us stood there watching Vietnamese peasants in those conical hats planting rice in Lake Michigan, which turned out to be a prophecy. The following year, I ended up in Vietnam. But, I had so much fun. I'll tell you a good acid story. Have you ever heard of Sister Corita? The artist. She was a calligraphic artist. She did beautiful paintings of words and phrases and love, and her pictures were enormously popular on posters. And eventually she dropped out of the order she was in and got married. think she got married, and she was scheduled in '66 to be the banquet speaker at the National Conference of Catholic Art Educators. And a few days before their banquet, a nun called me from a school that I had been reading poetry at that spring. And she said, "We've just lost our banquet speaker, Sister Corita. Do you do banquets?" And I said, "Oh God, I am so good at banquets. I kill at banquets." I never did a banquet in my life. And she said, "Well, could you do our banquet?" Absolutely. So after my talk, in which I had mentioned that some of the artists I knew were very influenced in their work by LSD, I was approached in the lobby by a nun, a priest, and 3 brothers. And the essence of their approach was, "Do you know where we could find some?" And I said, "Well, sister, as a matter of fact, I'm living with a couple of guys who deal it." This is when it was still legal. And I took them back to their crash pad, and they all dropped. And one of them was a little short brother, Brother Lawrence, and he lay down on the couch, and about an hour into the trip, I see him lying there, and he's going, "Oh, oh." I said, "Brother, what are you seeing?" "Oh, I'm rolling balls of air. And inside of each of them, oh, is the Madonna." So I stayed kind of in touch with each of these people. And 3 years later, when I got back from Vietnam, I looked them all up. And every single one of them had left the order and left the church. So my work.
Mission accomplished.
One of my proudest acts.
Yeah, give yourself a pat on the back for that one.
Yeah.
So have you ever had yellow sunshine?
Probably. I mean, I lived in Berkeley from 72 to 75 with Tim Page, who was the great gonzo journalist in Vietnam, who was blown up 4 times. The last time he had the right third of his brain blown out the back of his head. And he survived. He's still alive. And he's the guy that Dennis Hopper plays in Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
And they're making, George Hamilton is making a movie about him right now. His roommate was Sean Flynn, Errol Flynn's son, who was lost in Cambodia. So Tim and I lived together for almost 3 years in Berkeley, and an awful lot of acid came through it in those years. So I had all kinds.
And what was Timothy Leary like?
Tim was a lot of fun. I had one of his famous phrases printed over the door of our home in LA that said, "LA is where the migrants and the mutants and the future people come, the end point of terrestrial migration." And I had him on my radio show, and he said, "I take every drug there is, at least once every year. I do it like a Catholic does his Easter duty." And then he had to leave the show 5 minutes early to pick his son up at the dentist. You know, a little cognitive dissonance going on there, the mundality of it all. But he was fun to be around. It was always stimulating. He had opinions about everything. He regretted some of the things he had done in his life. And I thought he was one of the major figures of the 20th century. He's kind of forgotten now. You talk to kids about Timothy Leary, most of them don't know who the heck he is. But I think his work will be rediscovered because it too was filled with prophecies. And in fact, in 85, when I did the radio show with him on my Sound of the 60s show on NPR, I asked him what he was reading. And he says, I don't read anything these days but cyberpunk. And I hadn't heard the term yet. And I said, well, what's that? And he says, you got to read it. William Gibson, Neuromancer. Go ahead, read it. It'll tell you all about the Matrix. So what? Okay. So I've read every one of his books since, William Gibson. I'm in reading Agency, his new one now, which is even more frightening than the ones he's written in the past, because most of what he wrote all came true in the next few years. And this one is talking about multiple universes and how they interact with each other and how the computers fit into that. And interesting stuff. Well, we're taking this into a lot of different directions.
Love it.
Love it.
Yeah.
So he was talking about the Matrix all the way back in 85?
He basically invented the Matrix. Yeah, if you read Neuromancer, it's part of a trilogy with Mona Lisa, Overdrive, and Count Zero. You haven't read any of his stuff, William Gibson?
No.
Oh, well, start immediately.
Okay.
Start with Neuromancer. Yeah, and they're books of prophecy.
So one question I have for you to kind of take it back to the family acid. You guys are the Waltons on acid is what your daughter's friends called you guys. How did you introduce your children to psychedelics, or did you let them find it on their own?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I never did acid around the kids, but they heard us talk about it, and people like Oscar Janiger would come over to the house and show us his pictures from his experiments with artists back in 1950, I think. That's another story I should share with you. But I could share a story of my son's, one of his very first acid trips, if you have a moment for that.
Yeah.
This is a big, huge, thick, 10-pound magazine, weight, not price, from England, called Buffalo Zine. Does a lot of psychedelic stuff. Really, really interesting thing. And they came here from England to interview our family, and it was one of the few family acid interviews with all four of us, because our son, he still lives in LA, but not here at our house, and our daughter is up north, about 300 miles from here in San Jose. And so this is the trip of a lifetime. And they asked Devin about growing up in an acid-oriented family. In fact, I met my wife on an acid trip in a pygmy forest in Mendocino under a total eclipse of the moon on Tim Page's birthday, as one does. And so here is our acid family.
Very cool.
And they asked Devin about his acid experience. I think it's really amazing. So you don't mind if I read this to you?
Not at all. Go right ahead.
Devin says, my first real acid trip was when I was 15 or so. I was in Big Sur working at my best friend's uncle's gas station one summer. We'd traveled into Monterey to see Eyes Wide Shut. And after the movie let out, a girl we were with ran into a perma-fried gutter hippie with a kitten on his shoulder. He had liquid acid, and we bought some mini donuts, and he dropped some doses on a few, and we went on our merry way to trip later in the week. The night we decided to take it, my friend's uncle declared that we must be home by 10 p.m., but we were not going to obey him. We ate the infused donuts at Pfeiffer Beach at sunset in Big Sur. As the girl and my friend started tripping, I had not noticed any effects, so I asked to eat another donut.
Oh boy.
Almost as soon as I had swallowed the second donut, my trip began. Everything was wet with color, and I felt as if in a dream. The feeling was familiar and extremely euphoric. We tripped around the beach for a while, and then out of nowhere, a car full of teenagers drove into the parking lot, ran out onto the beach, and set off a barrage of fireworks. It is strange how being on acid causes reality to bend that way, like you are connected to the vein of synchronicity. Soon after that, two of our older stoner friends showed up to take care of us and make sure we were safe. Pretty soon after that, the girl who took the acid with us went a bit mad, looping herself into singing one verse of a rave track over and over and over and over. We headed to our friend's place to continue our trip while they babysat her. When we finally headed back to my friend's uncle's house late at night, he had locked us out, and we knocked on the door. He opened up the door in purple silk Speedo underwear, furiously raging at us for disobeying his command to be home by 10. He yelled at me that I was going home on the Greyhound bus in the morning and that we could sleep with the dogs outside. My friend and I each chose an old truck parked on the property and proceeded to come down and crash in our chosen vehicle. When I woke up in the morning and came into the house finally, there was a blood pressure monitor on the kitchen table. As promised, he put me on the bus home that morning, and I continued to come down as I listened to a couple of passengers who had met on the bus talk behind me. One was an obviously tweaked out man with a huge round growth on his ear. The other, a female nurse. They chatted away about their lives. Then the woman revealed her man was cheating on her and said she had a gun in her bag and was on her way to shoot him. She showed the man the gun in her purse and he said, "Yep, that'll do it." Later that day, I was back home with no regrets about the trip that got me there.
That's a wild first trip for sure.
Isn't that amazing? I don't know if he's done much since, and Katie's only done it once when she was 14 and she didn't like it. She's never tried it again. She's very down to earth.
Yeah, I think that was, for me, LSD was the one I came to last in my journey. And it really wasn't until I'm 44 now. So it was 3 years ago was the first time I took LSD. And so I started with microdosing. So I never overdid it and didn't get myself as say if I was reminiscent about any psychedelic experience, it was my early ones when I was in college where, there was no set and setting, wasn't taking into account, and that always can set you up for a bad experience. So, mine have always been good because I learned how to ramp up as opposed to dive into the deep end head first. So I love it. I think it's one of the best ones out there. I don't encourage, I don't push it on people or, if people have questions, I answer them, but I mean, those mountains.
Not for everybody. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, those mountains and behind Jimmy, when you go to 14,000 feet and you're standing on top of that mountain on some LSD, I've never seen clouds more beautiful in my entire life. And I think just the appreciation that it gives you for nature is unbelievable. And I mean, just the amount of love and joy that comes from those experiences is definitely beneficial. So I've always had good experiences on that.
I was so lucky because I had real sandos from the start. The real thing, and boy, often your earliest trips are the most memorable, because it's so unexpected. You don't know what's going to happen, and when they're good, they're way beyond good. So, I'd love to find some sandos again.
I was going to say, you got any in the archives back there?
I did a slideshow, an old-fashioned slideshow last December of images from my latest photo book, The Family Acid California, which is a great big, heavy book of 300 slides from all over the state. And afterwards, a couple of young followers of the site came up and slipped me 4 tabs. So nice. I still have them. And we go up to Lake Tahoe, to a little lake 1,000 feet above it in the Sierras called Echo Lake. We go from Echo Park to Echo Lake, and I was saving it for this summer, but I don't think we're going to go up there this summer. And I don't know, the COVID situation, I don't know whether I really want to trip in the midst of something like that, because there's so many bad things going on. And if somebody drops Trump's name in the middle of the trip, I don't know whether I'm going to flip out or reach for the non-existent machine gun.
Yeah, we've definitely dialed it back quite extensively because of these situations. And yeah, it goes back to set and setting. And, there's a lot of weird stuff that's going on. And you just don't want to put yourself in a bad situation because you're not in the ideal mindset because of current situation. So how is it being in LA with everything?
Well, not enough people are following the use a mask at all times you're outside, which really bothers me. It's just so disrespectful to everybody else. And so we don't go out much. There have been wonderful demonstrations here. Last month we had 50,000 people march on a Sunday afternoon. 50,000 people. And my son, Devin, has been in a lot of the protests, and he's been showing films that he makes on his website, on his Instagram. And we just, I'm 78, my wife just turned 76, so we're fragile in many ways. We're COVID's target audience. So I don't want to risk it, we take a little walk after dinner at night, but for the most part, we've just been in the house. I really don't want to take any chances. I've got a long-term project to build a museum for my archives in Montego Bay, and I want to be around to see that. So we're basically housebound.
So before saying, you had a tour of duty over in Vietnam and were part of the counterculture, what is this time like now going through this COVID situation? Does it remind you of, the wartime, in Vietnam and the counterculture when all that was going on, or does it feel completely different to you?
That's a good question. It's unique. It's completely different. But at the same time, you've got people committed to change things and demonstrations all over the country in places you would never expect to see them. That gives me great, great hope that this time we're really going to turn things around and this country will never, ever be the same again if we get that son of a bitch out of office. He never should have been in there. The lack of morality in the Republican Party is just astonishing to me. There are going to be an awful lot of people whose obituaries are going to begin, "We supported President Trump," when all right-minded, moral, righteous people were opposed to him, and we permitted him to perform atrocities on his own people and destroy the country. It's a unique time, and we'll be paying for it. You'll be paying for it for the rest of your lives, you younger people. I'm glad I'm old.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I never thought that I would experience in my lifetime in terms of what's going on. And after watching the documentary, I made a comment to Jimmy that we just need to put our big speakers out, open up our windows and put the speakers out and just put Bob on a 24-hour loop and just, let those vibrations get out there. And, we have crop dusters flying overhead with his music playing. I think the world would be a better place if we could just all stop and listen to Bob Marley for 24 hours and just really sit with the lyrics and let those lyrics resonate and take it all in and really understand. I would wonder what he would be thinking about this current situation and what he would have to say about this, because it's wild.
All the songs that never had got a chance to be written, all the great art that died with him at 36. He would have had the great Free Mandela song. I think he would have sung at Obama's inauguration with Aretha Franklin. You'd have the Queen of Soul and the King of Reggae side by side. I did an alternate history interview with Bob on his 65th birthday 10 years ago. Went to the alternate universe where he didn't die, and he was living in Selasieville in Africa, the town he founded for repatriating Rasta, and talked to him about all the things that he did in that universe that we didn't get a chance to see in this one. Something very, very vital was lost when he left us. But we still have those songs of freedom to give us solace, to give us guidance, to give us hope. Yeah. I mean, One Love was the anthem of the millennium.
Yeah.
The Exodus album was chosen by Time magazine as the best album of the 20th century, and Bob was the most influential artist of the second half of the 20th century, and the first half was Louis Armstrong, and they were both daily herb smokers. So take that, Straightnicks.
So you're one of the top 10, I think in 2008, were voted one of the top 10 most influential people in reggae because of your what you've contributed in the history. What led you to reggae, and what kind of lit that spark in you to kind of archive everything and create all the, preserve all the history of reggae?
Well, I've always been a collector. I've always been a public speaker my whole life. And I've supported my reggae habit as an actor, mostly voiceovers. You ever see Forrest Gump?
Yep.
I'm the announcer in the White House when he goes to visit Kennedy and he has to pee so bad. And when a subject interests me, I keep a file on it. Maybe I'll write about this someday, or maybe I'll speak about this someday. And, I'm first generation rock and roll. I was born in 1942, so I saw all the greats in the 50s growing up in New York with Alan Freed and, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Jackie Wilson, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, you name them, I saw them. And I was totally into rock and roll. In the 60s, the folk movement came in and put consciousness into the lyrics with people like Bob Dylan, and I loved the music even more. And by 1970, the major corporations had taken over, basically deracinated the music business and turned it into disco dreck. And I was looking for something that had the great harmonies of doo-wop and the conscious lyrics of the 60s music. And in 1973, a gonzo journalist from Australia named Michael Thomas wrote an article in Rolling Stone that said, reggae music crawls into your bloodstream like some vampire amoeba from the psychic rapids of Upper Niger consciousness. I said, whoa, man, I don't know what that is, but I got to find it right now. And I went out that day in Berkeley and I found a used copy of Catch a Fire, the initial pressing in the Zippo lighter cover. And my life changed forever from that moment. Next night I saw The Harder They Come, and when the spliff scene came, everybody in the theater lit a joint. You couldn't see the screen with all the smoke in it. And I went to Jamaica in '76 with my wife during the state of emergency, and one of the big stars in the music picked my pocket in Bob Marley's record shop. And then we were taken to Jimmy Cliff's house and hung out with him and a bunch of the early stars of the music. In 1979, my partner Hank Holmes and I started a reggae show in KCRW that ended up getting syndicated to over 130 stations all over the world. And we started a magazine called The Beat that ran for 28 years. And in 1984, I did my first Life of Bob Marley lecture, which I've now done probably 500-600 times all over the world at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress. I was the first speaker at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm the most frequent speaker there. I've done 9 shows. The EMP up in Seattle, Stanford, Harvard, the outback of Australia with an Aboriginal audience, the Maori people in New Zealand who gave Bob the title Redeemer. I've written 7 books about Bob and the history of reggae. So it got in my blood, and I just, this was such important music. This had such profound implications for the world at large that I wanted to turn everybody I knew onto it. So that past 47 years now, I've been a reggae evangelist. And I don't know, being picked, as one of the most influential people in reggae, I'm a fan. If somebody asks me what I am, I'm a fan. And I tried to save everything since that article appeared in Rolling Stone in June of '73. Everything I've come across about reggae, Rasta, Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, all the things that a study of reggae leads you to interest me. And it now fills 7 rooms floor to ceiling of our home. And the 6,000 grooviest things in the collection I haven't had access to for the past almost 20 years, because in 2001, the Queen Mary launched an 8-month-long exhibition of my archives and framed everything up. And so it was too big to bring back to the house. It's been in storage ever since, waiting to go and build a museum in Jamaica, which now seems like it's going to happen. And it's the most important music in the world, with the most important messages. And, I'll keep spreading the word every chance I get. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you still have that original album?
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
I paid $2.25 for it. It was a used record in Pellucidar Books on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. I figured for $2.25 I could take a chance. So that was my first record. The second was Harder They Come soundtrack on the way home from the movie. And then there was a wonderful little shop on Fillmore Street in San Francisco called Trenchtown Records, run by a guy from Trenchtown named Ruel Mills. And he imported Ras Michael and the Sons of Negus, Count Ossie and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari. I mean, these are things you'd buy just for the name. You didn't care whether it was great music or not. With a name like that, you had to have it. And he turned me on. He was my first teacher. And I spent an awful lot of money in that shop.
Do you have a favorite song?
Waiting in Vain.
Waiting in Vain.
Yeah. That's how I got to meet Bob. In the summer of 1978, I was hired by a couple of Hollywood screenwriters to novelize 2 screenplays. And we rented an A-frame on a mountaintop in Big Sur. And that summer, Bob did a tour of California and played in Santa Cruz, a couple of hours north of where we were staying. And we got tickets for both shows, and we got in early. And the Santa Cruz Civic Theater is like a high school gym. It's got bleachers on 3 sides, and the stage was only about 4 feet high. And the soundboard was right in the middle of the dance floor. And when we walked in, we were among the first people in the hall. There was a tall, skinny guy with little nubber dreadlocks just starting to sprout, standing by the soundboard. I figured he had something to do with the band, and I walked up and I said, "Pardon me, sir, but are you going to do Waiting in Vain tonight?" And he looked at me kind of funny and he said, "Why?" I said, "Oh, it's my favorite Bob Marley song, especially that incredible lead guitar line that Junior Marvin plays." And he said, "You want to meet Bob?" I was just like that. "Yeah. Can I bring my wife?" He said, "Sure." So the 3 of us go walking down this long, long hall to go backstage. And he says, "What's your name?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Roger. This is my wife, Mary." He says, "Hi, I'm Junior Marvin." So I said the right thing to the right guy. And he takes us into the back room, and there were 4 huge cafeteria tables put together to make one gigantic one. And each of the Wailers was sitting arm's length from the other, and they all had piles of herb, like an anthill in front of them, and an individual pack of rolling papers. And nobody was saying anything to anybody. And I had a poster that somebody was giving out in line to promote a show 3 nights later at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. And Junior said, "Why don't you ask Bob to sign your poster?" And I go, "Oh, yeah, right. Okay." So, I mean, I was speechless. And he brought me over to Bob, and Bob looked up, and his eyes were just so bloodshot, and he was so stoned. He was in the ites, as the Jamaicans say, in the red. And I asked him if he was going to do Waiting in Vain tonight, and he kind of looked up and he said, well, maybe. And he signed the poster, and the whole band signed the poster. He didn't do Waiting in Vain. He never did it live, because the I3 thought it was about his girlfriend, Cindy Breakspear, and Rita wouldn't sing it, and Judy sat out in solidarity with Rita, so he never got to perform his Most Beautiful Love Song live. I think he did it once in Montreal. And there's one other point I wanted to make. Well, anyhow, that was the night I met Bob, and oh, I know. Since then, I've had a total of 41 people involved in Bob's life sign the poster. Virtually all his kids, everybody in the band, and producers, and other people who've played with him. And when I loaned that to the Grammy Museum for their exhibition a couple of years ago, they insured it for $75,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's probably the most precious thing in the archive, along with an autograph of Haile Selassie on an envelope postmarked at the UN the day he made the war speech that Bob set to music. Yeah.
So 2 questions on that would be.
No, you can't have it.
Have you ever smoked with Bob?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In the bus, and, in the bungalow at the Sunset Marquee. But, they don't pass. So I've smoked with, but not the same joint.
Right. And then the other thing I want to kind of unpack a little bit with is the Selassie stuff, and how Bob got into that, and how impactful that was, and what all that entailed for him and his music.
He was exposed to Rasta in Trenchtown, where he grew up. He knew Mortimer Planner, who was one of the Rasta elders and kept a library of books that attracted not only people in the ghetto, but students from the University of the West Indies, like Kat Kaur, whose father was the finance minister. I think it's finance minister under Michael Manley's regime. And he was living in the summer of '66 at his mother's place, or in the spring of '66 in Delaware. And Selassie came to Jamaica on April 21st, 1966. And Rita and her cousin Vision Walker, who replaced Bob in the Wailers when he was abroad, saw him. And they both have told me that story, and they swear that when Selassie drove by them and waved his hand, they saw the stigmata of Christ in his hand. And Rita wrote to Bob in Delaware about what she had seen. And when Bob came back, she brought him to Planner's house. And so his early stages of instructions came from Planner. But later on, the Wailers became very disenchanted with him, because Planner was not the spiritual holy man that he would like people to think, but he took them to a whorehouse one night and came downstairs with a couple of women on his arms and a bottle of alcohol in each hand, and from that point forward, they had very little to do with him until the end of Bob's life, when Planner came back into his life. Now, this is not something that's generally known, but it's an important facet. It was revelatory for Bob to see someone who was so hypocritical. So he spoke to a lot of people about the faith. He sincerely believed that Haile Selassie was God incarnate in these times. But I just read the manuscript for a fascinating book called Pinnacle. Pinnacle was where the first Rastafarian so-called community was developed on the hills west of Kingston by a man named Leonard Howell. He was the first prophet of Rasta. And he was a Black Power advocate. And he wanted self-sufficiency for his colonialized people, back in the 1920s and 30s. And he established this community, and he wanted to have a figure that he could hold up to people as a Black liberator. And he chose Haile Selassie, who had been crowned king in 1930 in Ethiopia, and of whom he had been spoken by street preachers in Jamaica. They claim it was Marcus Garvey who first said it, but it wasn't. It was another minister who said, "Look to Africa, where a Black king will be crowned, for the day of deliverance is near," meaning repatriation. So Selassie was an invented godlike figure foretold by Leonard Howell. A lot of the dogma of the Rastafarian movement came much later from people in the slums of Kingston who had adapted the movement and added strictures to it, dietary strictures and other things that didn't pertain in the community of Pinnacle. And the government persecuted these people terribly. They burned the place down. They put him in jail several times. But he maintained his belief that Black man must unite and must overcome the oppression, the downpression of the capitalist system. And so the big argument among Rasta adherents has always been, is Selassie God incarnate in these times? Is he the reincarnation of Jesus? Because Jesus is an abomination created by Christians. The real historic figure was Jesus, and he was a Black man. Or was he merely a great statesman and a human being? There are a lot of people who believe that Bob abjured Selassie at the end of his life when he was baptized in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in October of 79, shortly before he went to the cancer clinic in Germany. But those who were with Bob in Germany afterwards don't believe that that's true. But Christians love to say, "Oh no, Bob believes in Jesus now." But I don't think that's true. But who am I? That's just my opinion.
Go ahead, Jim.
As far as you know, are there anyone in those Rasta circles that think that Bob was that second coming?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. In fact, have you seen my book, my Marley book? This one? So much things to say. One of the blurb on the back on top is, if Bob Marley is Jesus in these times, Roger Steffens is Peter, Carlos Santana.
Damn.
Nice. That's awesome.
I don't know if he means Peter, St. Peter or Peter Tosh, but I'll take either one. Peter was a real good friend of mine. I talked to Peter just right up to a couple of days before he passed, and I loved Peter. What people don't know about Peter is that he had one of the best senses of humor that I've ever encountered. He loved to twist the language. I helped produce a box set called Honorary Citizen. We had a whole page of words of the herbalist verbalist. He said he played in San Francisco, California, United States of Asatica, because there's nothing merry about America. It's Asatica. He played in Follywood and LA, Taiwan and Taitu. He called the Queen of England Queen Ear Liza bitch. And the judge was the Grudge. He spoke of the prime minister who shit in the House of Representative. So I always had a real good time with him. He called me a few days before he was shot, and he didn't have any of his own records. they were all begged, borrowed, or stolen. And whenever he needed a song, he would call me to tape it and overnight it to him. And a few days before he was murdered, he called, because No Nuclear War, his last album, had just come out. And he was working on a new one already. And he wanted to redo one of his early singles for Joe Gibbs called Here Comes the Judge, which was about all the most heinous criminals in the history of Jamaica. And he wanted to remake it with all the new bad guys, you know, Siaga and all the people he despised in Jamaica, and add their names to it. So I sent it to him, and a few days later he died. But I think, you know, he wore those dark glasses with the shaders on the side, and so you couldn't see his eyes. So when he was speaking in that deep voice of his and making these thunderous pronouncements, there was a twinkle in the eye you couldn't see. He loved putting people on. He loved intimidating people. There was a black writer for the LA Times named Dennis Hunt who actually thought he was certifiably insane. Peter didn't like the Black American audience. He thought they were so stupid to refrain from following Rastafari and from listening to reggae music and from hearing the talk about repatriation to Africa. The Black audience in the 70s was into Sly Stone and glam clothes and split level in the suburbs. They didn't want to hear about going back to Africa. And Peter couldn't understand that, couldn't understand why his audiences were all white.
Is that something that bothered those guys?
Tremendously. That was Bob's greatest regret. He was going to do a national tour with Stevie Wonder in 1980 after the Madison Square Garden show, which he was the opening act for Lionel Richie, if you can imagine that. Yeah.
The great prophet, Lionel Richie.
Yes. But he thought Lionel could bring him to a black audience, and yet the audience was, you know, I'd say predominantly white in those two.
Lionel was not the guy he's bringing more white people.
No. But Stevie would have. Stevie brought a mixed race audience. He had a huge black audience, and that would have been really interesting to see. They did play a couple of shows together at the Black Music Convention in '74 and '78. They played at the Dream Concert on October 4th, 1975, the last time the Three Wailers performed together ever, and the only time that the Three Wailers and the I3 played together was at that Dream Concert.
I had read or heard you say that you did a bio on Bunny Wailer, I believe, and it's like 1,600 pages or something like that, and you can't release it because he wouldn't let you. What are your thoughts on that, and do you think you'll ever get to release that?
He's going into the archives.
Damn.
1,800 pages.
Wow.
And he won't let me publish it.
Why not?
Because he's a bastard. Funny failure, they call him in Jamaica. He asked me to write his autobiography with him, co-write it. And I'm not a musician. I wanted my dear friend Leroy Jody Pearson, founder of Nighthawk Records, to co-write it with me because he is a brilliant musician. He had released some work with Bunny. And so we flew down in October of 1990 to Jamaica, to Kingston, ensconced for 3 weeks in a hotel room with Bunny. Some of the sessions lasted 14 hours in a single day. We played every song ever made by the Wailers and got the full story of each song. We got the whole life story because, you know, Bunny's father moved in with Bob Marley's mother when they were both little kids. And Bob was raised partly in Bunny's house, but he was treated as an outside child. In fact, they made him sleep under the house on the dirt underneath Bunny's father's house. It's a story that needs to be told. I used several of the quotes in So Much Things to Say, but you know, that's just a small percentage of the entire 1,800 pages, which is what, you know, every Whalers fan wants to read. Peter didn't get a chance to tell his story. Bob didn't. And there's Bunny, and nobody knows Bob better than Bunny. You know, they were together from the time they were little children. And his memory, at least back in 1980, was very, very strong. He's been very ill. He's had strokes. I think he's on the way out right now. And whenever we were talking about the Scatolites period, the initial period of their music, we would have members of the Scatolites in the interview sessions with us to tell us who the musicians were on each song. The result of those parts of the interviews was this book, the Bob Marley and the Wailers, the definitive discography, which has the story of every song they ever did, with a college textbook requirement of who are the players and what did they play, the number of tracks on the master tape, the name of the engineer, the matrix number on the wax of the records, the date of the sessions. This is the only book of its type for any Jamaican musician ever done. This is a college level discographical history of their music. And
is that one of yours?
That's Leroy and I did that. That's
Okay.
based on our interviews for the autobiography. And that's going to be a standard reference text for as long as people are interested in the Wailers. There's never been another book like it.
And where is Bunny in Jamaica, or is he in the States? Where does he live now?
No, he's in Kingston.
He's in Kingston.
He goes for medical treatment every once in a while to Cuba. But basically, he's in Jamaica.
Do you think you'll get to release that when he passes, or no? Do you think you'll never see light
I'm
of day?
78. I don't have time to devote years to that guy.
Right on.
But my only recompense is that history will have it. The tapes, there's 64 hours of tapes, Jimmy. 64 hours of tapes. And there's 1,800 pages of their transcriptions. And we wrote 3 chapters to give him an idea of how we would present his voice to the world. And he never read them. In fact, at one point he called me and says, "Why didn't you come to Miami and read them to me?" I said, "What, 5 years old, buddy? Come on, man." So it's been the greatest frustration of my reggae life, one of the only unhappy parts of it. But as I say, the recompense will be that history will have it. Maybe some scholar at the University of West Indies will find 5 years to turn it into a book. At least the transcriptions will be there for researchers.
My follow-up to that is we grew up on the Jersey Shore, and
Hey, I'm from Jersey.
Really?
Westwood.
All right,
King.
we're from Point Pleasant.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, Jersey boys.
Yeah, buddy.
I was born in Brooklyn, but when I was 9, we moved over to Bergen County.
Okay.
My father's family had lived in since the 1600s.
Cool.
Our whole generation left.
So growing up on the Jersey Shore, every summer you would see the Wailers going to Joey Harrison's, and even now you see, Wailers are coming. Who are the Wailers that are playing nowadays?
They aren't.
All right.
It's over. There's no Wailer in the band left. Family Man's had some strokes. He can't play anymore. I think his son Aston tours with a band called the Wailers Band, but there's no Wailers in it. Occasionally, Al Anderson, another Jersey boy from Montclair, goes out as Toe, T-O-W, the original Wailers, which is kind of odd because he was one of the least original Wailers. He was one of the last ones in. And Junior goes out sometimes with some version of the Wailers, but he hasn't done that for a while. So no, the Wailers are over.
And bringing up Junior, and Bob has some kids that have gone into the tradition, the family tradition, and
grandkids.
Who do you think does the best job of keeping the name going?
Ziggy and Steven and Skip. Yeah. Skip's got a lot of Bob in him.
And that's one of Bob's daughter's kids, right?
Skip, I think, is Sedella's son.
Okay. And besides Bob, and you mentioned Peter, and you mentioned Jimmy, who are some of your other favorite reggae artists, or some other reggae artists that, you know, fans of Airey Bros Radio should check out or listen to their message?
Well, go and pick out anything you can find by Alton Ellis, the king of rocksteady. One of the nicest people I ever knew in my life, and maybe next to Bob, my favorite singer. When I'm feeling low, I just put on anything by Alton Ellis and you feel better immediately. Joe Higgs, who was the teacher of Bob and the Wailing Souls and so many other people, is a brilliant artist. Ross Michael is still making really vital, experimental, edge-pushing music. Ross Michael and the Sons of Negus. He lives in LA. He used to do a Groundation every Sunday. And now, past 3 years, he's embraced the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is basically a Christian denomination, which has been kind of a shock to a lot of people. I don't think he's preaching the divinity of Selassie anymore. That's pretty shocking to a lot of people. Luciano, I've always loved Luciano. Taurus Riley, Jimmy Riley's son, Jimmy Riley, Slim Smith. There are just so many world-class artists that tiny island has produced. And it's not just the island, it's not just the city of Kingston, it's basically Western Kingston that the vast majority of all these artists come from. That's astonishing to me, music that has taken over every corner of the world. I was interviewed last year by Phil Kogan, who is the host and creator of The Amazing Race. He's won 10 Emmys for it. And he wanted to talk to me, he said, because he's been to 130 countries. And in every single country, bar none, he has found evidence of Bob Marley. And he wanted to know why. So if you go to Bucket, Buckit on YouTube, or just put my name and Phil Kogan, Keoghan, in, you'll see one of the most interesting interviews I've ever had with this fellow on his Bucket show. Click it before you tick it. Or, click it before you kick it. That's a good phrase.
And
I was just going to say, are there any new, younger artists that kind of scratch that itch for you?
I like Kabaka Pyramid. I don't really keep up with the music much anymore. It's so hard to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
You know, all the great statements of Rasta principles have been made by Culture and Burning Spear and all of that level of pantheon-worthy artists. And so it's really hard for a newcomer to make some new statement. But every generation needs someone to restate the eternal verities to them in a different rhythm. And I think that's what the younger people are doing. The Chronics, trying to think, there's one other I like a lot. It'll come to mind. I have so much stuffed in my brain that there's not much room in my hard drive left anymore at 78.
Not much more bandwidth.
No, that's right. I need new mental bandwidth.
So I must ask, when we have the reggae historian on the line, what are your thoughts on Toots and the Maytals?
Oh God, immortals! I mean, Toots. I did a lifetime interview with him at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I brought all my rarest Toots singles with me to play, especially the Coxon era stuff. And every time I put one on the turntable, he says, "Don't play that one. Don't play it. Why, Toots? We never get paid." All right, talk a little more, and I'd put another one. I don't play that one. We never get paid. I think he needs to let go of some of that enmity now. But Coxon, you know, he was notorious for never paying anybody more than like 10 pounds or give them royalties of 3 pounds. The most money the Wailers ever made for their almost 100 tracks in 2.5 years for Coxon was when they left the label and he settled up and gave them each 99 pounds. He couldn't bring himself to break 3 figures for anybody. But they also got their start in the business because of Coxon. He gave people careers, and maybe that was worth more than royalties to them. I remember years ago I had Bob Andy and Alton Ellis together on the Reggae Beat radio show. And oh man, Alton was just cussing out Coxon so bad. Coxon, for those of you who don't know, was the creator of Studio One, which was where almost every early artist in the late 50s and 60s got their start. Toots and Bob included. And he was just so down on Coxon, a terrible human being, and cheated everybody. He was just a bandulu man. And Bob was going, now Alton, you know, I understand what you're saying. I got ripped off too, but look what he did for us. You probably wouldn't be as well known if it weren't for what. No, man, you can't say that. That blood clot. So the show ends, and I go out to the parking lot, and Bob Andy and Alton Ellis, they're out there clapping hands, and they're doubled over in laughter. And I said, "What's going on?" And Bob says, "Well, last night up in Oakland, we were on a radio show and we had this same conversation, only as me cuss Coxon and Alton tell me I have to forgive him." That's such a typical Jamaican story. They love contention. Joe Higgs would argue about anything and everything, and he always had a contrary opinion to the popular one. Joe Higgs talked about the flag and the national motto of Jamaica, "Out of many we are one." He says that's not what that means. It means they went around the world and they found the one black man in each country and they brought him to Jamaica. Out of many we are one.
But I was talking about the financials and stuff. I think that's probably one of my most favorite Bob Marley interviews. It's with an English interviewer, and they asked him if he's rich or if he's wealthy.
No, not an Englishman. That's an Australian.
An Australian.
The only reason he agreed to do the interview with that racist mother was his last name was Negus, which was Selassie's title, Negus Nagast, King of Kings. And are you rich?
Yeah.
You say rich, how you mean rich? You have a lot of possessions? Possession make you rich? I don't have that kind of riches. My riches is life forever.
That's it.
Now, I learned on my most recent lecture tour of Australia that Mr. Negus has moved to the equivalent of the Humboldt County Iron Triangle. He's moved to an area of Eastern Australia where the most herb in the country is grown, and he lives right in the heart of that community now. So maybe Bob sank in after a while, but that's one of the most embarrassing interviews I've ever seen. It's such a racist, condescending, ignorant display on that man's part. When I play that as part of my show, my Life of Bob Marley lecture, people laugh at him.
So my question for you to follow up on that is, we kind of have a situation in the world right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. What do you think? Where do you think Bob would stand on that? How do you think he would come to that and bring the divide together?
I think he'd write a theme song for him. Imagine Bob Marley's Black Lives Matter song. We go and take the white man and batter him down, because Black Lives Matter, man. Yeah, he'd be in the forefront of the marches.
And you said before that your acting and your voiceover kind of helped your reggae habit. How did you get into that realm of things?
Oh, I've been acting since I was 5 years old. I went to Carnegie Tech and went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I was the New Jersey State Oratory Champion when I was a senior in high school. You know, the American Legion National Oratory Contest. Can't believe that. Won a scholarship to Rutgers. My parents wouldn't send me there because it wasn't Catholic. Yeah. It's just a natural outgrowth, I think.
What has been some of your favorite projects or movies that you've worked on?
I did a series years ago. I was the advisor to it, and I played myself in it, called 6 O'Clock Follies, which was set at the television station in Saigon. And it was kind of like MASH, but it made its debut the day in 1980 that the helicopter crashed in Iran trying to rescue the hostages. So nobody wanted to laugh about Vietnam in 1980, and we only got 7 episodes on the air. But I did that show with what's his name? Phil Hartman was in that show with us, and Larry Fishburne. Excuse me, Lawrence Fishburne. We hung around a lot in those days, and there's even something on Instagram of a show, an improv show we did late one night, very much in the red, with Larry and Phil Hartman and myself and a couple of other people that you can hear on Instagram. I mean, I've always enjoyed acting, and I've done a lot of books on tape. And that was ironic because I had to audition to read my own book on tape. This is after I read Bill Gates' most recent book on tape, Hemingway, William Forsythe, or Frederick Forsythe, whatever his name is. And so I picked the most difficult patois passage in So Much Things to Say, and did that for the audition. I said, all right, mother, come up with somebody who can do that. So they ended up hiring me to do my own book. But I love voiceovers because I'm basically very lazy, and you don't have to get into makeup. You don't have to memorize lines. You don't have to wait in the trailer for 14 hours to do 2 lines. You go in the studio, you read, and you go home. And I've done an awful lot of interesting things. I've probably narrated close to 1,000 films, and voiceover is where I did most of the stuff. But I'm in American President and Wag the Dog. And Can't Hardly Wait. Did you ever see that high school?
It's one of my favorite movies growing up.
All right, you ready for this?
Yep.
You gonna do it?
I am the Love Jock. And now,
you were the DJ when he called in for Barry Manilow, right?
Love Jock, and for the next hour, it's all Mandy all the time with the Love Jock.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever been a cartoon character?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was, most of those were in the 80s. I've forgotten. I was Skull and I don't know, some Marvel thing. I've done a lot of cartoons. Matt Groening is one of my oldest friends. I knew him when he was sleeping in the back seat of his car. I've loved to watch his success over the years. He's now one of the richest men in Hollywood, and a huge Lee Perry freak.
Really?
Yeah, he loves scratch. He used to be a music columnist for the Los Angeles Reader.
Does he have a time machine?
Does he have a time machine?
Don't they always say that he predicts the future in his cartoons?
God, yeah. That's a lot of cases where it just came totally true, huh?
Yeah.
Rich, before we start rapid fire, you have anything else for Roger?
The only one last thing I would like to ask, this one goes to our good friend of the Airey Bros, Timmy Eason. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about how important football, soccer was to Bob.
Oh, major. I mean, he set up a tour of America in cities that had soccer stadiums, so he could play soccer in the afternoon after the sound check. He loved Pelé. His best friend was Jamaica's greatest soccer hero ever, Alan Skill Cole. And I asked Skill a couple of years ago if he thought Bob could have been pro, and he said no, he wasn't that good. But he said he was, on a semi-pro level, very good. Yeah. But the idea that he might have been a professional player, he said no, he wasn't that good.
If he was that good and he had a choice, do you think he would have took football over music?
No. No, because he could influence more people and reach more people through the music because he had a message to give. People like Mortimer Planner told him he had been ordained to deliver the message of Rastafari to the world, and I think he took that seriously.
Roger, do you have a daily practice?
Yeah, you got a match?
Best answer yet.
I had my first joint in Saigon in late November, early December 1967, and I never smoked anything, so I had to learn how to smoke, and I kept throwing up. I'd have one or two hits and I'd run for the head. And they used to take bets how many hits Roger could hold before he had to throw up. It took me a few weeks to learn how to smoke, but I'm sure glad I stuck with it. In fact, here it is from Saigon, complete with Vietnamese tax stamp on there. See that? Park Lanes. These were repackaged British cigarettes they emptied out and put commie weed in. And you could buy a pack from any Ciclo driver for 25 cents, or a carton of 200 filter-tipped commie weed joints for $2. In other words, a penny a joint.
Wow.
And they kept us Airey the entire time. I'm sure it was one of the weapons in their quiver. Park Lane.
Was that pretty prevalent amongst the guys?
Well, when I got there in the beginning of November '67, I think maybe 10% of the psychological operations unit I was stationed with in Saigon smoked. By the time I left at the end of 1969, I extended 3 times. And that's another story. I'd say 70% of the unit, up to and including lieutenants and captains, would come to my apartment, which I had the second year on the main street of Saigon, and where a lot of people, hung out off duty with journalists and other people, and they were all smokers, but by that point, everybody in America was smoking pot too. So you have a drafted army, you're going to get potheads in there, and some of them are going to be, lieutenants. So it was really prevalent. And then they did a huge, right after I left, at the beginning of '70, they did a huge crackdown on pot. You see how old I am, I still call it pot. I should call it herb. And instead, the commies started packaging opium joints laced with heroin.
Jeez.
And they were cigarettes, so you couldn't smell it, odorless. And they hooked a whole new generation of draftees on heroin because they suppressed marijuana so heavily. Yeah. The Republicans have a hell of a lot to answer for.
Yeah, that's for sure. We've got to get to the bottom of a lot of things. Do you have a favorite strain?
Well, my wife, we have a big backyard, and we live in California. And we have something that my wife has put together, a kind of hybrid called Echo Park Shitface. So I like that.
Okay.
Hey, Rich, did you have a question for Roger about Bob's favorite strain?
Is it true that lamb's bread was Bob's strain?
Yeah, he loved lamb's bread. And it's not really bread, it's breath. But they
breath.
pronounce the T like a D. So it's even written as bread, but it's lamb's breath.
Gotcha. I think I knew that.
Mary, come over and say hello.
Hello.
Come over.
I'm going outside. Are you wearing pants?
Am I wearing pants? None of your business. This is Mother Mary.
Hi.
Getting
Mary.
Howdy.
I was just talking about your.
I know. I heard it.
Oh, you heard.
So I'm going outside. The phone is yours.
Thank you, dear.
Okay. You guys are having a great
We
time.
met on an
I
acid
love
trip
it.
at Pygmy Forest.
It's so awesome.
40. We just celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
We declared ourselves married 10 days after we met. That's
Wow.
the best decision of my life.
That must have been a pretty profound acid trip.
Whoa, it was something else. With Tim Page, can you imagine? Think about Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now and what you're doing with him.
Are you a coffee drinker?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you brew your coffee, and what kind of beans do you like?
I drink decaf. Be careful of my heart. I have one big cup every morning.
Okay. And as of right now, what are you listening to, music-wise, podcast-wise, anything like that?
Well, behind me, you see there are several cabinets back. Here we go. Back there, and there's like, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. They have 15 drawers, and in each drawer there are 210 cassettes. I think altogether there's like 14,000 hours of music on cassettes. So I play cassettes more than anything else. I'll just, open a drawer and just reach in without looking and pull out a cassette at random and listen to something I made 30 years ago. The kids and I always made the covers for the cassettes, so there's little artworks on each cassette. And I can't believe I wrote as tiny as I did. It's maybe 1 point, in fact, not even 2 on a font. And it's the history of the music. Every time I met another collector and he had stuff I didn't have, I'd be there with my tape recorder. I went all over the world, rifling through the best collections of the best collectors on earth. And that's going to be the core of the museum, I think.
Is there a tentative date for breaking ground or anything yet?
No, COVID's thrown everything into turmoil.
What is it like down there right now for them?
They've closed it off pretty well. They've kept a lid on it. They have cases, but it's not like Peru or someplace. And on an island that small, they can effect the proper things necessary. So, but they don't want any travelers, and there goes their tourist industry. So it's really been hellish on the economy.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I've been talking about since this whole thing has started. Knowing that you got to spend time with Timothy Leary, do you have any favorite conspiracy theory or anything that we should look into that we already haven't?
No, I'm not much into conspiracies.
Okay.
Conspiracies give too much ability to the people that they're made up about. There's a level of ineptitude in even the most intelligent organization, and to go for the farthest out, most illogical explanation for things that happen, I just don't buy it.
Cool.
Roger, where can we direct people to find your work?
Depends on what work. If they want to see my photographs, Instagram, The Family Acid, all one word, The Family Acid. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube. Just put Roger Steffens, Steffens, in there, and you'll see dozens and dozens of interviews and documentaries. I guess those 2 places are the best place to start. And all my books.
I was going to say, where can everyone buy your books?
They're almost all my books are on Amazon.
Okay.
My first book was with the great photographer Bruce Talleman, who went to Gabon with Bob in 1980. We met a couple of months before when we were on tour with Bob together in late '79 in LA. And he was the only photographer Bob brought with him to Gabon. And that book is called Bob Marley Spirit Dancer. And then we did an exhibition. Let me grab that. These show up as used copies on the internet. This is The World of Reggae featuring Bob Marley, Treasures from Roger Steffens' Reggae Archives. And there are 6,000 things on display at the Queen Mary. And there's about 1,600, about a quarter of them in the catalog. I think the poster of Bob is in here too. Yeah. There's that poster I told you about that's signed by him. And that you can find copies of. That's a picture book. That's got some, really fascinating stuff from ska through rocksteady and reggae and the internationalization of it. That's fun. And then I did a book with Lee Jaffe, who was known as the White Whaler, who played harmonica on the Natty Dread album. And that was called One Love, My Life with Bob Marley. And then we did the discography book. And then the reggae scrapbook that I did with the late Peter Simon, the wonderful photographer, Carly's brother. And that's a fun book. It's got all kinds of things you can take out, posters and postcards and fake records. And there's a DVD in there with interviews. I did an hour-long collection of interviews with Alton Ellis and Joe Higgs and all kinds of great reggae people. And then so much things to say. The oral history of Bob Marley. It took me 15 years to wrestle this damn thing to the ground. And then there's 4 books of photography: The Family Acid Jamaica, San Francisco, and Family Acid California. And Katie and I are working on the next one, which will be my Vietnam memoir, which will be filled with artifacts. I was drafted into PSYOPs. Well, I wasn't drafted into PSYOPs. I enlisted for an extra year when I got drafted because they guaranteed me a job in radio and TV, and I figured that was my best way to stay out of Nam. And after basic training, they sent me to PSYOP school. And that's not what I signed up for. They sent me to Vietnam to carry 80 pounds of loudspeaker backpacks into frontline combat operations, broadcasting pre-recorded surrender messages to the Viet Cong. I have you surrounded. We have you surrounded. And when the Tet Offensive broke out 3 months after I got to Nam, there were 52 people living in sewer pipes on the street in front of my barracks. And people were dying every day. You'd go out in the morning and step over bodies. And so I wrote to a town in Wisconsin where I had done my poetry show many times, and I was really well known there in Racine. And I wrote a letter to the editor of the paper asking for refugee supplies for these people. And I guaranteed that if they sent me stuff, I would personally distribute it so it didn't end up on the black market. A couple of weeks later, 2 5-ton trucks pull into the PSYOPs compound with my mail. These huge 9-foot-tall steel containers, and the door opens and all these boxes come out, all addressed to me. And they had made me the colonel's typist when I got to Saigon because I typed so fast. And I said, all right, if I don't have to go into combat, I'll stay here and type your letters, Colonel. And so I went into his office. I said, Colonel, there's something outside you got to see. I'm very busy, Private. I said, no, you got to see this. So he comes out, and there are these 2 5-ton trucks with all this mail pouring out of them. What the hell's that? I said, well, that's refugee supplies my friends have sent me. And I'm going to send it all back. What do you mean? Come into my office. They said, well, I'm so busy typing your letters all day, sir. I don't have time. And I promised my friends I would personally distribute it. And I wanted it ended up on the black market. He promoted me Spec 4, which is like corporal on the spot, gave me my own Quonset hut, told me I could go anywhere in Vietnam, work on any project I thought worthwhile, as long as I took pictures. So he could take the credit. I didn't care. I wasn't a lifer. So when my year was up and I still had like a year and a half to go on the enlistment, I kept extending to get an early out, a 5-month early out. So I spent a total of 26 months in country. They burned my whole block down to the ground on Ho Chi Minh's birthday in the renewed offensive in May of 68. I worked everywhere from the DMZ to the Delta and built villages and brought medical and dental assistance to people. In the end, it was over 100 tons of food and clothing that people sent me from the States. So I never fired a shot, came home with a clean conscience. I tried to undo the damage, but I never wanted to be an American again. And I spent all of 1970 writing a memoir about my time in Vietnam and lecturing back and forth across the country 3 times. I was in the area when the Kent State massacre occurred. And a lot of people who knew me as a Goldwater conservative when I went to Nam, who would never listen to an anti-war speaker, hired me to come and tell them about my 26 months in Vietnam, which I illustrated with slides. And by the end of the year, I didn't want to be in America anymore. Kissinger, Nixon, all those thieves and murderers still in charge. So I moved to Marrakesh. I lived in the Medina in Marrakesh with a war correspondent I met on the island of the Coconut Monk in Vietnam, a cute little blonde from California. And we lived in the Medina for most of that year. And by the end of the year, I was tired of not having indoor plumbing and hot and cold running water, so we moved back. Been a pretty unpredictable time for a kid from Jersey.
Yeah, got an amazing story and have seen and done some wild and amazing things.
And live to tell the tale.
Yeah. One last question I have for you. Of all of your books that you've done, if someone wanted to gift one of those books, which one would you recommend?
If they're a Marley fan, this is the book that Rolling Stone headlined their review of and said, definitive, this might be the best Bob Marley book ever. And there are over 700 Bob Marley books. So if you're a Marley fan, this is essential.
That's the one.
And if you're a photo fan, if you like really interesting, a lot of psychedelic pictures, I do a lot of double exposures, maybe because I'm a Gemini. I like twins, doubles. If you can find the first book, it's out of print, and there are collector's copies up on eBay. It's just called The Family Acid. But my latest one, I'm really proud of. It's a great big book called The Family Acid California. And it's 300 images going back to 1968 when I first came to LA on leave from Vietnam through 2016. And it's a good place to rest your head. And there's captions in the back of the book for all the pictures, which explain who's in them and what the circumstances were. Katie is the editor of that. So I've got a daughter who is my archivist. I'm so fortunate. I'm so lucky. Both my kids are really good writers and photographers.
And that's out now?
Yeah.
It's available? Cool. Sweet.
Yeah, you can find a link for it on my Instagram.
And is that The Family Acid, or do you have your own Instagram account?
No, I don't want to do that because I'd be competing with my own kid.
Yeah.
You know, she only uses prints and slides, you know, film. Everything on the site, virtually everything is print.
Okay.
And I've been shooting digitally for the past 15 years. But before that, it was all film. So maybe someday I'll do my own site with my digital stuff. But you know, the site is of interest to people, older people my age, the boomers, but it's also fascinated a lot of young people whose parents or grandparents were hippies, and they have this idealized image of what the 60s and 70s were like. And the vast majority of pictures on the site are from the 60s and 70s. And it's a very different world. And this past year now has proven that those are times that will never, ever be duplicated. Yeah. And
Well,
somebody complained about my pictures. Everybody in your pictures is smiling. You know, when you look back at the recognized great photographers, they're mostly black and white pictures of people shooting up in the alley, or Southerners and, you know, in states with Confederate flags behind them. And, you know, that's all dark stuff. My life has been filled with joy, with hanging out with artists and writers and painters and musicians, broadcasters, and people doing something creative with their lives, bringing something out of nothing. And there's a joy to that. There's an awful lot of hard days for people who are not employed in normal ways. I've had a lot of financial struggles in my life, but you know, life is for creation. We're here to bring something into existence that didn't exist before. That's what I feel. And those are the kind of people I like to hang out with. And then also go to YouTube. We have that YouTube channel with interviews. I did with Timothy Leary, for example. The Leary interview is up there. And Richie Havens did a live concert on my radio show. There's an awful lot of stuff you can discover on YouTube. Yeah.
Roger, it has been an honor and a pleasure. We are so grateful and appreciative of your time. And yeah, we love everything you've done, and we will link all that stuff in the show notes for you as well.
I think you have set the record now, because I've done countless interviews. This is the longest interview I've ever done.
Talk to you all day, sir. Appreciate
Yeah, we can listen to you talk all day.
Hey, Jersey boys, I hope someday I can welcome you both to the archives when all of this clears. You ever get out to California?
Yeah, we both lived in San Diego for a couple of years, and so we still have some ties and connections there. We're just put all of our travel kind of on hold the last couple months because of everything. But yeah, I mean, when we can get back there, we'd love to make our way up towards you and get some of that East Park shit face or whatever it was called.
Echo Park shit face.
Right? Well, you've got a permanent invitation, Rich.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Roger.
Was your given name Jimi?
No, my given name is James. So I just, spelled Jimmy because everyone called me Jimmy. But once I realized Jimi Hendrix spelt it that way, I was like, I'm going Jimi.
Have to do that. Thank you so much, fellas. It's great to get to know you, and I can't wait to meet you fleshly sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Same here. Thank you, Roger.
One love.
One love. Have a good night, sir.
Thanks.